If someone with an avoidant attachment suddenly stops pulling away, doesn't disappear after emotional moments, and starts staying, that's not coincidence. That's something very few people ever get to see. Because when an avoidant shifts this one behavior, it usually means they're no longer running from you, they're choosing you, even if they never say it out loud. Most people misunderstand avoidant attachment. They think love looks loud, expressive, or emotionally open. But avoidants don't work that way. When they care, it doesn't show up in big speeches or dramatic gestures. It shows up quietly, in consistency, in presence, in effort that doesn't ask for recognition. If you notice they're checking in more, staying during uncomfortable conversations, or letting you see parts of their routine they once kept private, that's not random, that's trust forming. Avoidants only do this when they feel emotionally safe. The mistake most people make is demanding more too soon, but pressure makes avoidants retreat, understanding makes them stay. The shift you're looking for isn't intensity, it's stability. If this is making you rethink someone in your life, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, are they showing up in quiet ways? If yes, you may be closer than you think. Comment clarity if you want to understand avoidant behavior more deeply. One of the most misunderstood signs of love in an avoidant person is consistency, not intensity, not dramatic declarations, not sudden emotional openness. Consistency. Avoidants are wired to protect their independence. For them, closeness often feels risky, not comforting. So when they begin to show up regularly, replying without disappearing, keeping plans, staying present during emotional moments, that is not small, that is effort. And for an avoidant, effort equals care. This is where many people misread the situation. They expect love to look expressive, emotional, or verbally reassuring. But avoidants don't lead with emotion, they lead with behavior. When they start choosing you repeatedly, even in simple ways, it means they're slowly lowering their guard. Consistency from an avoidant might look quiet. They check in without being asked. They stop pulling away after deep conversations. They don't vanish when things feel slightly uncomfortable. Instead of retreating, they stay. And that's important because staying goes against their natural instinct to withdraw. What's happening internally is significant. They're learning that connection doesn't automatically mean loss of control. They're testing safety. They're seeing if closeness can exist without pressure, expectation, or emotional overwhelm. Every time they stay instead of distancing, they're rewiring how they relate to intimacy. This is why pushing for more can backfire. When someone notices progress and demands emotional depth too quickly, the avoidant nervous system reads it as danger. Not because they don't care, but because they're not ready to move faster than their sense of safety allows. The real signal to watch for is this: do they return? Do they maintain contact? Do they show up again after moments that once would have made them disappear? If yes, that's growth. That's attachment forming in its own quiet way. Love from an avoidant doesn't shout. It stabilizes. It shows up. It chooses consistency over intensity. And if you recognize this shift, the most powerful thing you can do isn't chase or pressure. It's match their steadiness. Because when an avoidant feels safe enough to stay, they're already closer than you think. One of the clearest signs an avoidant is developing real feelings isn't emotional expression, it's inclusion. Avoidant individuals are used to operating independently. They make choices alone, plan their lives privately, and rarely feel the need to explain themselves. Independence feels safe to them. So when they start involving you in decisions, even small ones, it's meaningful. This doesn't always look dramatic. It might be asking your opinion before making plans, mentioning future events with you in mind, or adjusting their schedule to accommodate you. These moments may seem ordinary, but for an avoidant, they represent a shift from self-protection to shared consideration. What's happening beneath the surface is important. They're slowly allowing your presence to influence their world. That takes trust. It means they no longer see connection as something that threatens their autonomy. Instead, they're beginning to experience it as something that adds value. Many people miss this sign because they expect emotional vulnerability first. But avoidants often show practical vulnerability before emotional vulnerability. Letting someone affect their choices feels riskier than saying something heartfelt. It means admitting that someone matters. This is also why pressuring them for labels or emotional reassurance can feel overwhelming. While you may be looking for verbal confirmation, they're showing attachment through action. They're saying, "I'm making room for you," even if they don't use those words. Another subtle indicator is when they start thinking ahead with you in mind. Not necessarily long-term promises, but small future references. Next week, next month, the next time something comes up. Avoidants usually live very much in the present to avoid emotional expectations. So when the future starts including you, it's intentional. The key is how you respond. If you meet this shift with patience instead of pressure, it reinforces safety. If you acknowledge their effort without demanding more, it deepens trust. Avoidants open slowly, but when they do, it's because they genuinely feel secure. Real connection with an avoidant doesn't arrive in a rush. It builds through quiet consistency, mutual respect, and the absence of emotional force. When they start letting you into their decisions, it's their way of saying, "You matter here," and that, in their world, is a big step forward. One of the most overlooked signs of emotional attachment in an avoidant person is reliability. Not romantic gestures, not emotional speeches, just showing up when they say they will. Avoidants often struggle with consistency in relationships because consistency requires emotional availability. Early on, they may cancel plans, go quiet, or pull back when things feel too close. This isn't always a lack of interest. It's usually discomfort with dependence, both theirs and yours. So when an avoidant begins to follow through, it matters. Reliability can look simple. Keeping plans, responding when they said they would, checking in without being prompted. But these actions take effort for someone whose instinct is to stay emotionally self-contained. When they become dependable, it means they're choosing stability over avoidance. What's important to understand is that avoidants don't commit through words first. They commit through behavior. They show care by being steady, not expressive. If they consistently show up in your life without disappearing, that's not accidental, that's intentional. This shift often happens slowly. At first you might not even notice it, but over time you realize they're no longer pulling away after moments of closeness. They're no longer creating distance when things feel real. Instead, they remain present. That presence is significant. It means they're learning to tolerate emotional closeness without needing to escape it. They're building trust, not just in you, but in themselves and their ability to stay connected. Many people make the mistake of overlooking this because it doesn't feel dramatic. But in avoidant attachment, reliability is vulnerability. It's saying, "You can count on me," without having to say it out loud. The key is how you respond. If you meet their reliability with calm appreciation instead of pressure, you reinforce the behavior. If you push for more reassurance or faster progress, it can make them retreat again. Avoidance needs space to choose closeness rather than feel forced into it. When an avoidant becomes reliable, it's not because they've suddenly changed who they are. It's because they've decided the connection feels safe enough to maintain. And in their world, choosing to stay consistent is one of the clearest signs of care there is. One of the most meaningful changes in an avoidant person isn't how much time they spend with you. It's how much of themselves they begin to share. Avoidants are naturally private. They process emotions internally and often believe that sharing struggles makes them vulnerable or dependent. So when they start opening up, even a little, it matters more than it seems. This doesn't usually come in the form of emotional outpouring. It's subtle. They may mention stress at work, talk about something that disappointed them, or briefly acknowledge a fear or insecurity. These moments can seem small, but for an avoidant, they're significant. What's happening is trust building beneath the surface. They're testing whether it's safe to be seen without being judged, fixed, or pressured. They're seeing how you respond when they let their guard down, even slightly. Avoidants don't open up for attention. They open up when they feel emotionally safe. When they choose to share something personal, it means they no longer see you as a threat to their independence. They're beginning to feel that connection doesn't equal loss of control. Many people misinterpret this stage. They expect deep emotional conversations or vulnerability on demand, but that expectation can shut an avoidant down. Their openness grows gradually, in layers. One honest sentence today might lead to deeper trust weeks later. Another important sign is when they stop deflecting emotional topics. Instead of changing the subject or becoming distant, they stay present. Even if the conversation feels uncomfortable, that's a powerful shift. It shows they're learning to tolerate emotional closeness instead of avoiding it. The key here is response. If you listen without interrogating, validate without pushing, and stay calm instead of emotional, you reinforce safety. Avoidants need to feel that vulnerability won't lead to pressure or conflict. When they feel understood instead of analyzed, they open more naturally. This is also where many connections either grow or fall apart. People often rush this stage, mistaking openness for readiness for more, but avoidants need time to integrate emotional closeness at their own pace. When an avoidant begins sharing their inner world, even in small pieces, it's not casual. It's intentional. It means they're slowly trusting you with parts of themselves they usually keep guarded, and in their language, that's a meaningful step toward real emotional connection. One of the clearest signs that an avoidant is growing emotionally attached is not dramatic affection, it's calm presence. Avoidants are often misunderstood as emotionally unavailable, but the truth is they tend to regulate themselves by creating space. Distance helps them feel in control, so when they choose to stay close without pulling away, that's meaningful. Calm presence looks simple. They sit with you during quiet moments. They don't rush to leave after a conversation. They remain steady instead of disappearing when emotions rise. There's no urgency, no intensity, just consistency. And for an avoidant, that steadiness is a big step. This shift usually happens when they no longer feel threatened by closeness. Early on, emotional connection can trigger their instinct to retreat. But over time, if they feel respected and not pressured, they begin to relax. They stop seeing closeness as something that demands something from them. Many people overlook this sign because it doesn't feel exciting. There's no dramatic confession or emotional breakthrough. But what's happening internally is important. The avoidant is learning that they can be near someone without losing themselves. That's not easy for them. You might notice they stay present during difficult conversations instead of shutting down. They listen instead of deflecting. They don't try to escape silence. These moments indicate growing emotional tolerance, the ability to remain connected without feeling overwhelmed. This is also why pushing for more emotion at this stage can backfire. When someone demands emotional intensity, the avoidant may feel unsafe again and retreat. But when calm presence is accepted as enough, it deepens trust. Another subtle sign is how relaxed they seem around you. Their body language softens, they're less guarded, they don't feel the need to constantly protect their independence. This is not indifference, it's comfort. Real connection with an avoidant develops quietly. It's built through shared stillness, mutual respect, and emotional safety. When they choose calm presence over distance, it means they're no longer just tolerating closeness, they're accepting it. And that acceptance is one of the strongest indicators that an avoidant is forming a genuine emotional bond. One of the strongest signs that an avoidant truly cares isn't intensity, emotion, or big promises, it's long-term consistency. Avoidants don't fall in love quickly, and they rarely make emotional declarations they're unsure they can maintain. So when they choose to remain steady over time, it carries real meaning. Consistency for an avoidant is not accidental. It requires conscious effort. It means continuing to show up even when things feel routine, when emotions aren't exciting, and when there's no immediate reward. This is important because avoidants are more comfortable with independence than attachment. Staying connected takes intention. You'll notice this in small but meaningful ways. They keep communicating without disappearing. They continue making time for you even when life gets busy. They don't create emotional distance when things become predictable. Instead of pulling away once the newness fades, they stay present. This is often the stage people misunderstand most, because avoidants don't express love dramatically. Their commitment can look quiet, but consistency over time is their version of emotional investment. It means they've decided the connection is safe enough to maintain. What's happening internally is a shift from self-protection to trust. The avoidant begins to believe that closeness doesn't automatically lead to loss of freedom or emotional overwhelm. They start seeing the relationship as something stable rather than threatening. This is also why avoidants value predictability. When the dynamic feels calm and respectful, they feel more secure staying connected. They don't need constant reassurance or emotional highs. They need steadiness. And when they provide that steadiness in return, it's a meaningful step forward. Many people miss this sign because it lacks drama, but real emotional security rarely feels dramatic. It feels reliable. It feels calm. It feels like someone choosing to remain present without being asked. The key is not to test this consistency or demand proof of feelings. Avoidants don't respond well to pressure, but when their consistency is met with trust and emotional balance, it deepens the bond naturally. When an avoidant continues showing up over time, not just during easy moments, but also during ordinary or slightly uncomfortable ones, it's a clear indication of emotional commitment. They may never say, "I love you," quickly or loudly, but if they're still there, still present, still choosing you quietly over time, that's their way of saying it. And in the language of avoidant attachment, that choice means more than words ever could. Recognizing these shifts in an avoidant is important, but what you do next matters just as much. Many connections fall apart, not because the avoidant doesn't care, but because the response to their progress creates pressure they're not ready for. When you start seeing consistency, calm presence, emotional openness, and reliability, the instinct might be to lean in harder, to seek clarity, to ask for reassurance, to define the relationship. But with avoidance, timing and tone are everything. The healthiest response is to meet their progress with steadiness, not intensity. Avoidants open up when they feel safe, not evaluated. If every emotional step they take is met with questions or expectations, their nervous system reads it as risk. But when their effort is met with calm appreciation, it reinforces the idea that connection doesn't come with emotional cost. Another important piece is allowing space without assuming distance means loss. Avoidants still need moments of independence, even when they care deeply. Giving them that space without withdrawing emotionally shows maturity and security, two things that strengthen trust. It's also important to avoid testing them. Avoidant partners often fail tests they never agreed to take. Silence, emotional withdrawal, or indirect communication can confuse them and trigger retreat. Clear, grounded communication works better than emotional pressure. What truly deepens the bond is emotional consistency, being the same person on calm days and difficult ones, responding instead of reacting, listening without trying to fix or push. These behaviors signal emotional safety, which is what allows avoidants to stay connected long term. Another key point: don't rush the label. Avoidants need to feel the relationship before they define it. Let the connection speak for itself. When they feel secure, commitment grows naturally, not because they're forced, but because they choose it. The truth is, avoidants don't fall fast, but when they stay, it's intentional. They don't attach easily, but when they do, it's built on trust, stability, and emotional comfort. That kind of connection may not be dramatic, but it's deeply rooted. If you notice these shifts and respond with patience instead of pressure, you create space for something real to develop. Not a rushed connection, not emotional highs and lows, but something steady, mutual, and lasting. And often, that quiet consistency is the strongest form of love an avoidant can offer. One of the most painful misunderstandings in connections with avoidant individuals is this. People often assume distance means a lack of feeling, but more often, distance appears when the avoidant feels emotionally overwhelmed, not uninterested. When an avoidant begins to care, their nervous system becomes more sensitive, not more confident. This is why certain well-intended behaviors can slowly push them away. One of the biggest triggers is emotional pressure, not conflict pressure. Repeatedly asking where things are going, seeking reassurance too often, or needing constant emotional validation can feel overwhelming to someone who processes closeness slowly. Even if they care deeply, they may retreat simply to regain a sense of emotional balance. Another common mistake is interpreting their need for space as rejection. When someone reacts to distance with anxiety or withdrawal of affection, it creates an emotional push-pull. Avoidants don't respond well to emotional tests. They don't read between the lines. If something needs to be said, clarity works far better than emotional signaling. Control is another quiet trigger. This can look like monitoring their availability, questioning their independence, or making them feel guilty for needing time alone. Avoidants value autonomy. When they feel it slipping away, they instinctively protect it, even if it means pulling back from someone they care about. What actually keeps an avoidant close is emotional steadiness, being grounded in yourself, letting connection develop without forcing direction, showing warmth without demand. These things tell an avoidant, you're safe here, you don't have to perform or prove anything. It's also important to understand that avoidants often express care in practical ways rather than emotional ones. They may help, show up consistently, or stay present during difficult moments, even if they struggle to verbalize feelings. Recognizing these efforts instead of dismissing them builds trust. Perhaps the most powerful thing you can do is remain emotionally self-sufficient, not distant, not cold, just secure. Avoidants feel safest around people who are emotionally stable and grounded in themselves. When you stop chasing clarity and start embodying calm, something shifts. The avoidant no longer feels pressure to defend their independence. Instead, they feel free to stay. And when an avoidant stays by choice, without being pushed, tested, or rushed, that's when real connection begins to deepen. Because with avoidance, love doesn't grow through intensity. It grows through safety, patience, and quiet consistency. One of the most important and least talked about parts of connecting with an avoidant is knowing how to stay emotionally healthy while the relationship develops. Because while patience is powerful, self-abandonment is not. When an avoidant begins to open up, it's easy to shift all your focus toward maintaining the connection. You might become more careful with your words, more accommodating, or more willing to ignore your own needs just to keep the peace. But this is where many people quietly lose themselves. The truth is, avoidants don't feel safest with someone who sacrifices their identity. They feel safest with someone who is emotionally grounded, self-aware, and stable on their own. When you remain centered in who you are, it sends a subtle message. Connection is a choice, not a dependency. Healthy closeness with an avoidant is built on balance. You show warmth without chasing. You express needs without demanding outcomes. You stay open, but not overexposed. This balance allows the avoidant to move closer without feeling engulfed. Another key element is emotional pacing. Avoidants often need time to process feelings internally before they can express them. If you move faster emotionally than they can handle, they may shut down, not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed. Slowing down doesn't stall connection, it strengthens it. At the same time, it's important to notice whether effort flows both ways. Healthy avoidance softens over time. If weeks or months pass with no growth, no emotional availability, and no consistency, that's not patience, that's stagnation. Emotional safety goes both ways. This is where clarity becomes essential. You don't need ultimatums, but you do need honesty with yourself. Are you feeling calm or anxious, secure or uncertain, growing or shrinking? These answers matter. A balanced connection with an avoidant allows space for individuality and togetherness. You don't have to chase closeness, and you don't have to suppress your needs. You simply remain steady, open, and emotionally present. And when an avoidant feels that, when they sense that connection doesn't come with pressure or fear, they often step forward naturally, not with grand declarations, but with consistency, effort, and quiet loyalty. That's when you know the connection is real, not because of intensity, not because of promises, but because both people are showing up as they are, without forcing change. In the end, the goal isn't to make an avoidant stay. It's to create a space where staying feels safe for both of you. By the time you've noticed the shifts, consistency, calm presence, small moments of openness, the next step is crucial: reinforcing connection without triggering retreat. Avoidants are sensitive to pressure. Even well-intentioned attempts to secure them can backfire. The most powerful tool you have is steady, patient reinforcement. Start with acknowledgement. When they show up consistently, follow through on plans, or share something personal, recognize it quietly without making it dramatic. Simple appreciation communicates that their effort is noticed, which builds trust. Avoidants respond better to acknowledgement than to emotional overreactions. Another key strategy is emotional predictability. Avoidants feel safest when interactions are steady. This doesn't mean being robotic or suppressing feelings. It means keeping responses measured, showing up reliably, and avoiding unnecessary tests or manipulations. When your behavior remains calm and predictable, it signals safety, which encourages them to stay connected. Encourage openness, but don't demand it. Avoidants reveal themselves gradually. One day, it may be a small thought about their past, the next, a subtle insight about their feelings, and eventually, deeper trust develops. Patience is critical here. Pressure makes them retreat. Understanding makes them return. Respect boundaries. Space isn't rejection. It's part of their process. If an avoidant asks for time alone or doesn't immediately respond, treat it neutrally. Avoid filling the gap with anxiety or constant follow-ups. Instead, continue showing presence in quiet ways, which reinforces security without intruding. Consistency from both sides matters. Avoidants are learning that relationships don't have to feel threatening. If you model emotional steadiness, self-awareness, and reliability, they begin to mirror it naturally. Your calm, grounded presence becomes a safe container for connection, giving them room to grow closer without fear. Finally, understand that deep connection with an avoidant is built over time, not in moments of intensity. Grand gestures or verbal declarations rarely accelerate trust. What works is sustained, low-pressure effort, being present, being reliable, being calm, and being emotionally secure. This creates an environment where the avoidant can fully invest at their own pace. When you practice this, you notice subtle but profound changes. They check in without being asked. They share small pieces of their inner world, and they remain present even when challenges arise. These behaviors are their way of saying, "I trust this connection. I choose it." The beauty of relationships with avoidants is that once trust is established, love isn't fleeting, it isn't dramatic, it's steady, real, and quiet, a bond built on understanding, patience, and mutual respect.